Okay. I know he's still here. You better be, I see you. Ta! And that's what I thought. You don't mess around with, oh my God, Jesus Christ! Hello, and welcome back. I'm gonna take you on a bit of a journey. I want you to close your eyes and picture it. The year is 10 years ago, and if you asked me at the time what my favorite game franchise was, the answer was always Dead Space. I have loved Dead Space 1 and 2 forever. For as long as I can play games. I recently scrolled all the way back through my purchase history on Steam to find that Dead Space 2 was the first game I bought on Steam after I had built my PC. That's how much I loved these games. I had it on the 360 and still wanted to play it on PC. I have always been a fan of Dead Space. Dead Space is what started my love of Resident Evil, because those games inspired Dead Space. So when I went back and played it and I could see where those inspirations came from, well, I had a better love for Resident Evil. And now I can say that Resident Evil is one of my favorite game franchises of all time. And with the last entry in the Dead Space series coming out 10 years ago, and it was kind of like, you know, EA did their thing that they do. What I'm trying to say is EA fucked it. They fucked Visceral. Dead Space 3 didn't sell as well as they wanted it to, and then they shut it down. And then they've resurrected the corpse of the studio that they shut down 10 years ago, and then they're marionetting the corpse around. However, the Dead Space remake kind of slaps. Like, a lot? Here's the thing, I have been loving this new trend of survival horror kind of coming back. A lot of these horror icons from 10, 15 years ago are getting remakes in this modern day. We got the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake. Resident Evil has kind of gone its own path with 7 and 8. Dead Space is coming back. We've got the Resident Evil 4 remake. Alan Wake is getting a sequel. Survival horror has never been in a better place, whether you like the trend of remakes or not. But I can absolutely say with full confidence that Dead Space 2023 just understands what Dead Space was. You've probably heard that 1,000 times, but you've never heard it from me. So sit down and listen to what I fucking have to say. Dead Space 2008 was made by Visceral Games. Dead Space 2023 was made by EA Motive, a studio that I was unfamiliar with until this game came out, and holy shit do they have my attention. Because Dead Space 2023 is one of the most meticulous remakes I have ever played that has so much care and love and passion behind it. They took everything that made Dead Space 2008 good and kept it. But then they took everything that made Dead Space 2008 not so good and changed it. You've probably heard this before, but Dead Space 2023 plays how you remember Dead Space 2008 playing. Does that make sense? Like when I played this new remake, I felt like I was playing the 2008 game for the first time. Like that's how it felt with everything that they did to it. It is just so special. But I want to talk about what they did that made it so much special. Let's start with the most obvious thing. The visuals in this game are an absolute improvement on the game that came out 15 years ago. Wow, shocker, who would have fucking guessed? But somehow, if you go back and play the original game, it still holds up visually exceptionally well. And that is entirely due to its art design. The way the game feels is what holds up. The textures and the lighting are clearly from 2008, but everything else feels refreshing. There hasn't been anything that looks like Dead Space since Dead Space. The way the Ishimura is designed, the way it's got very clear Ridley Scott alien inspiration, and the way that the Ishimura also has like massive Japanese inspirations, it all just feels wholly unique, and there has been nothing else like it in that 15-year time stretch. And so what EA Motive have been able to do in replicating that art style and that art direction is superb. The visuals here are nut-worthy, okay? From the fog and the ambient inclusion to the lighting effects to the way the Ishimura feels. When I tell y'all that this game is dark, it is pitch fucking black. You rely on your flashlight more in this game than any other survival horror game I have played up to in this point. The game is black, always. You can only see where your light is pointing like 80% of the time. It is nuts. Now here's where things get a little wonky, because I have a relatively beefy PC. I have a Ryzen 5700 XT, which isn't top of the line, but it's also not that old, and my computer kind of struggled to run this game on higher settings. I was able to find a balance that ran at a lock solid like 70 to 80 FPS at a mixing between some mediums and some highs in different settings. And then I got a very stable frame rate. But if you want to rock this game at ultra settings on PC, you need a bit of a tank. It is kind of a powerhouse, but you can clearly see that powerhouse on screen in the shadows and the lighting designs, the way the fog reflects the light and fills up a screen. It is very, very impressive. But the thing that I found myself really captivated by is if you were to play The Last of Us remake that came out recently, but you couldn't play that at the top of the line settings, was it really a worth it remake? Most people would probably say no, because that remake at its core was mostly a visual upgrade. There were some accessibility things that were really cool that were added, but for the most part, it was just a visual overhaul. But if you can play Dead Space, even if you can only play it on the lowest settings, I still fundamentally recommend this game, which is crazy to say for a remake, because you would think that it's just a visual overhaul, but there is so much more to this game than just the visuals. Everything surrounding the visuals is so superb that if you can't play this on the beefiest, thickest, fattest PC on the planet, you are still in for an absolute treat. Speaking of absolute treat, the USG Ishimura, the setting of our game. Isaac and his crew go to the Ishimura. Spoiler alert, bad things happen, people die, and that's the game. Now, in the original game, the developers at Visceral wanted the Ishimura to be fully explorable, but because of the hardware at the time, they were limited with what they could do. There was a tram system that acted as a level gate between, the 12 or 13 levels of the game. You would get on the tram, and once you left a level, you could never return. And so the developers took that idea and that concept from the original and expanded on it in the coolest way possible. I know you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but it's just so cool. The tram system now essentially works like a fast travel system, and the Ishimura top to bottom is fully explorable until you go to Aegis 7, in which case, obviously, you're in the last chapter of the game, and it gives you a big no turning back point. It's like, hey, you should do what you want to do, you should finish stuff before you go to Aegis 7, because if you go to Aegis 7, then you can't return, and if you go there, and then it's the final level, and there's the final boss, and you know how video games work, right? Great, cool. But what was so cool was the way levels were like tied together. You would go through the back end room of like medical, and then you would pop out in engineering, and then you would unlock the tram station for engineering, and then you could fast travel between medical and engineering and mining. It was just a really, really cool feature. And I thought to myself when I first got the game, well, the Ishimura was already kind of cool. Like, it was kind of sub-explorable levels, right? Each level was explorable within itself, but you couldn't obviously explore the whole thing. What benefit do you get in being able to explore the whole thing? EA Motive answered that question. You see, instead of having to keep one power node on you to unlock a door, which would often, more times than not, give you just a power node back in return, which was just kind of a net zero situation, EA Motive thought, well, how about we make a keycard system? And this keycard system is really cool because it incentivizes backtracking. You get different levels of a keycard, and you can go back to areas you've been to before on the Ishimura and unlock those rooms for basically just bonuses. There is no reason not to, except for something else, which we'll get to later. But that's a really, really good system in wanting people to get back and explore your map. That you've made this fully immersive, top to bottom, explorable Ishimura and you want people to explore it, that's a really cool way to incentivize that and also get rid of a gameplay mechanic from the original games that I've never been a fan of. Using upgrade materials to open doors to then just get a net equal on your upgrade materials is a weird choice. EA Motive, this is really cool. A+. Now, the story. Dead Space 1, 2, and 3 have always kind of had convoluted, weird lore. And Dead Space 1 was definitely the weakest in trying to tell that lore, because that's not the point of Dead Space 1. Dead Space 1 was trying to originally scare you. And so what EA Motive have done is they have come to the Dead Space story, and without changing any of the original story's beats from beginning to end, they were able to fill in gaps and add things that you would have sworn were there in the first game if you didn't know that they weren't. They were able to fill these gaps so effortlessly that I just don't know how they do it. It was so cool. What they did in telling this story is effortlessly set up Dead Space 2. Because the thing is, when you play Dead Space 1 and then you move into Dead Space 2, they don't really do a good job of setting up any of the lore or the story for Dead Space 2, and you have to, at least for me, it was really confusing. It was confusing for 12-year-old Jaden. What can I say? But this game so effortlessly fills in those gaps that it makes the bridge from Dead Space 1 to Dead Space 2 a breeze. It is so cool. I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say they added a couple of side missions. They fleshed out a couple of characters, specifically Nicole and Isaac and their relationship. And at the end of the day, like replaying it, it just feels right. It just feels like what should have been there in the beginning. And because they got Gunnar Wright, the original voice actor for Isaac in both 1, 2, and 3, and a lot of people don't know that he voiced him in Dead Space 1, but he did because he voiced the grunts and the stomps, they just have more room to explore those characters. They make Isaac feel like an engineer who's just kind of, you know, out of his comfort zone. He's just a smart dude who's in a really bad situation right now, and I just love Gunnar Wright. I love Isaac as a character. I really like the new mocap. I just think it's really, really cool. But the thing that I am most excited to talk about is the thing that makes Dead Space Remake so much fun to replay. EA Motive, when making this game, have been touting what they call the Intensity Director. Now, the Intensity Director was basically their fancy jargon of saying the back end of our game is going to do bad stuff to you if you're doing really good. That's paraphrased though, they didn't actually say that. So essentially, what's going on is the Intensity Director kind of notices how you're doing. Are you doing really well? Cool, I'm gonna throw more shit at you. You doing really bad? Cool, we're gonna taper off of it. And remember how I said there was really no reason not to backtrack and get new resources? Well, the Intensity Director is something that you should be thinking about when you backtrack, because in the original game, when you killed stuff, it died, cool, you're done. However, in Dead Space 2023, the Intensity Director, it's keeping you on your toes all the time. You're gonna go back into a room and they're gonna be like, shit, here's a bunch of necromorphs. You want some lurkers? You want some slicers? You want, what are the weird, tubey guys are that fall apart into little squid pieces? I'm just gonna throw a bunch of them at you. They just do it. And the cool thing about the Intensity Director is it's not just throwing necromorphs at you. It's not just throwing enemies at you. They change the map sometimes, and it really gets inside your head. I don't think you understand how stressful it is to go into a room, clear out the room, leave, come back about an hour or two later because you have a key card and you know there's a room there, and you walk in and it's pitch black and full of fog. And you can hear shit rummaging in the walls, but nothing ever jumps out at you. It is terrifying the way they build this tension. Fog will just pour in. Fucking vent fans will and just jump off the vents to scare the shit out of you for no reason. There is a jump scare on a tram at some point in the game that was really cool, and that one absolutely threw me off because the tram is supposed to be your safe space. EA Motive decided to say fuck you. That's what they said when they did that. But the Intensity Director is so cool. It's so interesting. I hope more horror games can implement something similar to that, because Alien Isolation also had a similar mechanic with their xenomorph, and it just helps to add tension. You're always on your toes. You don't necessarily know what's going on. You don't know if you're gonna turn a corner and all of those creepy growls you've been hearing is a necromorph just waiting to jump out at you, or if it's just necromorphs in the walls and they're just not coming for you. And it has made replaying the game so spectacular. It keeps you on your toes. It changes up gameplay significantly because every area is different. And when you're backtracking, you're always kind of on your toes. No two areas are gonna be exactly the same for everybody because of the way the back end of the game just balances its scares. And it is such a cool mechanic. And it is really this like missing link in what was already a perfect game. When they first announced the Dead Space remake, I myself, along with many people on the internet, thought, why? Dead Space holds up exceptionally well. Dead Space 1 and 2 are games that I go back to and play on regular basis. But after actually having played this game, I can say that EA Motive did a spectacular job. They handled it with so much care and respect and passion for not only the fans, but the original game and their original intentions with it. It just takes what was already good and elevates it, makes it just a little bit better in every way for a modern audience. And that is a feat that I do not envy. I don't know how they did it, but I am so glad they did. Now, if $60 is a lot for you, I totally understand. Pick up the original Dead Space, because here's a cool thing. Unlike other remakes, the original Dead Space is still there if you want to play it. So if you want to pick up the original, it's also really fucking good. But if you have the money for this new remake, I genuinely believe that this is the definitive way that Dead Space should be played. And if EA Motive have their eyes set on Dead Space 2 next, I am exceptionally excited because Dead Space 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. Go watch this video. Dexter, put the video right here. Go watch that video because I talk about how much I love Dead Space 2. I am a fan of survival horror. And Dead Space 2023 was just really good. It was really good. And if you're at all interested, you should please absolutely check it out, because I'm kind of shocked that EA made a good single-player horror game with no microtransactions, no co-op, no online anything. It is just a fun, great 12 to 15 hour horror game with exceptional replay value in the way that it gives you bonuses when you replay, has so many secrets to unlock. It just feels like such an old school vibe. Coming from EA, a company that said that single player games were dead, they gave us such an old school style vibe with the ability to just, unlock all of the cool secrets by playing the game. Can't believe I'm saying that's old school, but that's not something you see a lot of times nowadays, especially in, big AAA blockbuster games. But Dead Space 2023 was a genuine surprise. And shockingly, I can say that Dead Space might just be one of my favorite games of all time now, because it took a game that I already love dearly and just made it so much better. So thank you guys for checking out another video. If you're at all interested, please check out Dead Space. How many times have I said Dead Space in this video? Dexter, don't actually count it. Put a fake tally here, unless you're a masochist and want to count it. I don't know how many times I said it, but thanks for watching another. Oh my God. Dude, stop it. Cthulhu, okay. Oh, dude, get out of it. I swear to God, Cthulhu. I swear to God. It is dry as a bone down here.